The morning my daughter-in-law came to take everything, I was on my knees in the garden with dirt under my fingernails and a chipped mug of coffee going cold on the step beside me. I heard the car before I saw it. Not the friendly crunch of my son's old sedan. This was something low and expensive, tires whispering over my gravel like they were trying not to wake anyone. I looked up, shears still in my hand, and watched a black car I'd never seen pull in beside my little Volvo. Vanessa stepped out first, white pantsuit, sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, heels sinking into the loose stones like the ground itself was beneath her. And then the driver's door opened, and a man in a gray suit climbed out carrying a leather briefcase. My son was nowhere in sight. They had been married 8 days. I set down the shears very slowly, the way you set something down when your hands aren't quite steady, and I thought about the numbers sitting in accounts 3 towns over. $53 million. Money my husband spent 40 years building with his 2 hands that I had never once mentioned to the woman now walking up my path with a lawyer at her heel. Thank God I stayed quiet. Before I tell you exactly what she slid across my kitchen table that morning and what I did about it, do me one small favor. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you've ever had to protect someone you love from a person who only wanted them for what they had, hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because this story is for you. My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 68 years old, and this is how I stayed silent about the fortune my late husband left me, and how that silence saved my only son. Walter and I were married for 44 years. Most people in our town knew him as the man who ran the linen company, the trucks you'd see backing up behind the hospital at dawn, the crates of clean white sheets stacked outside the restaurants on Main Street. What almost nobody knew was how far those trucks really went, or how much that quiet, unglamorous business had grown. Walter started with nothing. His father laid brick until his back gave out, and his mother took in laundry for the wealthy families on the hill. That's where the whole thing began, if you think about it. A boy watching his mother scrub other people's sheets and deciding there had to be a better way to do it. He was 23 when we met, driving a delivery route for a linen service that barely paid him. I was a 24-year-old nurse working the night shift at County General, and every morning at the end of my shift, this young man would wheel in the fresh linens, whistling like the day was already going his way. "You're too cheerful for 6 in the morning," I told him once, dead on my feet. "And you're too tired to be that pretty," he said, and handed me a stack of warm towels straight off the truck. We married 9 months later. 2 years after that, Walter borrowed against everything we owned, which wasn't much, and bought out the tiny failing linen service he'd been driving for. 3 trucks, 1 leaky warehouse, and a route he could recite in his sleep. "This is the start of something, Maggie," he told me the night we signed the papers, both of us too nervous to eat. I don't know what yet, but it's the start. He wasn't wrong. Over the next 20 years, Walter turned 3 trucks into 40. He landed the hospitals first, then the hotels, then contract after contract until Ellison Linen was servicing half the state. Restaurants, clinics, nursing homes, any place that needed something clean and never thought about where it came from. By the time he was 55, he had warehouses in 4 states and more than 200 people on payroll. And through all of it, we lived in the same 3-bedroom house we bought when I was pregnant with Daniel, same street, same slightly crooked front porch. Walter drove a pickup until it had 200,000 miles on it, and I still clipped coupons out of habit. "Money that shows off," Walter used to say, "is money asking to be taken. Keep it quiet, keep it working, and it'll take care of you long after you stop being able to take care of it." I didn't understand how wise that was until much, much later. When Daniel was born, Walter did something I'll never forget. He started a savings account for our son the same week, and then he made me promise we'd never tell the boy how much was in it. "He has to want to build his own life," Walter said, "not wait around to inherit ours." So Daniel grew up thinking we were comfortable. Not poor, not rich, comfortable. He knew his father worked hard. He didn't know his father was worth more than everyone on our street combined. And Daniel, bless him, never once seemed to want that kind of money. Where Walter loved the hum of a working warehouse, Daniel loved music. From the time he was 7, he was sawing away at a rented cello in the school orchestra, and by high school, he could play something that would stop you in your tracks. He didn't go into the business. He never even considered it. He became a music teacher, high school band and orchestra, and played cello in a small community ensemble on weekends for the pure joy of it. Some fathers would have been disappointed. Walter was the proudest man in town. "He does what he loves, and he sleeps easy at night," Walter told me. "That's worth more than my whole company, Maggie. I'd trade every truck for that." 3 years before Walter got sick, a national company came knocking. They wanted Ellison linen, all of it. Walter turned them down twice. The third time, they came back with $50 million, and Walter, who was starting to feel his age, finally shook the man's hand. He invested most of it carefully, the same way he'd done everything. Slow, quiet, unglamorous. And when the pancreatic cancer came and took him in 14 months while our son and I held his hands, the full weight of what he'd built finally landed on me. Between the sale, the investments, the life insurance, and the properties, I inherited $53 million. Daniel inherited a trust of $1 million, locked until he turned 35, 3 years away. Walter had set it all up with his lawyer down to the last comma, making certain I would be the one holding the reins. His last clear words to me, whispered in our bedroom with the afternoon light coming through the curtains, were these: "Take care of our boy, but don't hand him the world. Let him earn his corner of it." I promised. I had no idea how hard that promise would be to keep. The first year without Walter, I don't remember much of. I wore his old cardigan around the house until it stopped smelling like him. I set 2 places at the table for a month before I could bear to set one. I'd pick up the phone to tell him something funny, and then remember, all over again, that there was no one on the other end. Daniel was my anchor. He came by 3-4 times a week. He fixed the gutter, changed the furnace filter, sat with me while I cried over old photographs. He never made me feel like a burden. That's the son we raised. Steady, kind, the kind of man who noticed when your coffee was empty and refilled it without being asked. The money just sat there. Raymond, my financial advisor, managed it while I learned how to be a person again. I barely looked at the statements. What did it matter? You can't buy back 44 years. Slowly, life came back. I started going to church again, joined a widows group at the community center, had lunch with my oldest friend Rosa every Thursday like clockwork. I laughed again. Real laughs, the kind that surprise you. And through all of it, Daniel stayed single. He'd had a couple of relationships over the years, nothing that lasted. At 32, he seemed content with his students, his cello, and his little circle of friends. Sometimes I worried he'd end up alone, but he seemed happy, so I kept my worrying where it belonged, to myself. Then, 7 months ago, everything changed. Daniel met Vanessa at a fundraiser for the school music program. She wasn't a teacher, wasn't a parent. She was there, she said, because she loved supporting the arts. She was a luxury real estate agent, the kind whose face is on bus benches selling million-dollar listings. The way Daniel described that night, you'd think the heavens opened. She just walked over, Mom. Started asking about the cello. Said she'd always wanted to learn an instrument. I don't know. Something about her. Within 2 weeks, they were exclusive. Within a month, he brought her to Sunday dinner. I remember the sound of her heels on my hardwood floor before I even saw her. Sharp, quick, sure of themselves. She came in with a designer bag on her arm and diamonds at her ears, and she looked around my modest living room with an expression I mistook, at first, for warmth. "What a charming little house," she said. "So cozy. Daniel tells me his father was in business?" "He had a company, yes," I said. "Linens, was it?" She smiled. "That's so interesting. Was it a big operation or more of a local thing?" There was something in the way she asked, too quick, too pointed, more curious about the size of it than the man who'd built it. But Daniel was glowing across the room, so I brushed it off. "It was his life's work," I said simply. "He sold it before he passed." "Oh, he sold it." Her eyes flickered. That must have been quite a payday. I let the question fall to the floor unanswered and went to check the roast. Later that evening, While Daniel and I did the dishes the way we always had, Vanessa excused herself to the bathroom. She was gone nearly 20 minutes, and when I went upstairs that night, my bedroom door, which I always keep closed, was standing open a few inches. Nothing was missing, nothing was disturbed. But someone had been in there. I stood in my own doorway with my heart beating a little too fast, and I heard Walter's voice in my head, the thing he always said, "Trust your gut, Maggie. It knows things before your head catches up." That night, my gut was screaming. I told myself I was being a jealous mother. I told myself a lot of things, but the flags kept coming, and they kept getting harder to explain away. Within 2 months, Vanessa had moved into Daniel's apartment. This was the same son who once told me he needed his own space so badly he'd never live with a woman before marriage. When I gently asked if things were moving fast, he laughed it off. "When you know, Mom. Isn't that what you always said about you and Dad?" Then his spending changed. My frugal son, who drove the same little sedan for 9 years and packed his lunch every day, suddenly had a luxury watch on his wrist and was talking about trading in the car for something more appropriate. He started wearing clothes I knew he couldn't afford on a teacher's salary. "Vanessa says I've been too careful with money my whole life," he told me. "She says I deserve to actually live a little." And every time I saw her, she found her way back to the same subject. At a dinner Daniel insisted on paying for, at a restaurant far too expensive for him, Vanessa swirled a glass of wine and said, "You know, Margaret, Daniel mentioned his father was really quite successful. He must have left you very well taken care of." "Walter made sure I don't have to worry," I said. "But that linen company, Daniel says it was huge before the sale. That had to be millions, didn't it? And I'd imagine there were investments too. Smart men always diversify." "Walter handled all of that," I said, playing the vague, sweet old widow. "I never had a head for numbers." That was a lie, of course. Walter taught me every detail of our finances precisely so I'd never be helpless. But something told me to keep that card face down, and I did. That was the night I noticed Daniel had gone quiet. He didn't stop her questions. He just stared at his plate, looking like a man who wasn't sure how he'd ended up at his own table. Around that same time, the calls got shorter. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then rare. When we did talk, Vanessa was usually nearby, listening, smiling that smile that never reached her eyes. And then Daniel canceled our visit to Walter's grave on his birthday, something we'd sworn we would always do together. When I called that evening, hurt, Vanessa answered his phone. "Oh, he feels terrible," she said. "But we had this networking thing I just couldn't skip. You understand? I'm sure Walter would want us to get ahead." The sound of my late husband's name in that woman's mouth, a man she'd never met, landed like a slap. I did what I always did when the world stopped making sense. I went to Rosa. We'd been friends 42 years. She was one of maybe 3 people alive who knew the real size of what Walter left me. We sat in her yellow kitchen, and I told her everything. The questions, the open bedroom door, the way Daniel was changing. "And what have you told her?" Rosa asked. "About the money?" "Nothing. Not a number. Not a hint." Rosa nodded slowly. "Then keep it that way. Walter always said the wrong people can smell money. Don't you dare confirm a thing until you know exactly who she is." "But what if I'm wrong?" I said, and I heard how small my voice was. "What if she truly loves him and I'm just a bitter old woman who can't let go of her son?" Rosa reached across the table and took my hand. "Then no harm done, Maggie. If she loves him for him, your money won't matter to her one bit. But if she's after what Walter built, you'll thank God you kept your mouth shut." I drove home that day with my mind made up. Whatever came next, I would not say the number out loud. 4 months after they met, my phone rang and Daniel's voice came through with a strange, breathless energy. "Mom, I asked Vanessa to marry me. She said yes." I gripped the counter. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Have you set a date?" "Next month." "Next month?" "When you know, you know," he said again, and it had started to sound less like a feeling and more like a line someone had handed him. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. "Mom, I was actually hoping. The wedding's going to cost a bit, and a teacher's salary only stretches so far. Vanessa has some ideas for making it special. I was wondering if you might help us out. In his entire adult life, Daniel had never asked me for money, not once. He'd been raised to make his own way, and he'd been proud of it. Of course, I said carefully. Come by this weekend. We'll talk it through. After I hung up, I went into Walter's old study and looked at his photograph on the desk. What do? I whispered. I could almost hear him. Protect the boy. But let him walk into his own lessons, Maggie. You can't live them for him. The question was whether this particular lesson was going to cost my son more than a broken heart. What Daniel had described as making it special turned out to be a $90,000 wedding. Vanessa came to my kitchen that weekend and slid a spreadsheet across the table with the ease of a woman ordering lunch. A designer gown, a tailored tuxedo, 180 guests at Rosewood Manor, the most expensive venue in 3 counties, a top-shelf open bar, a 5-course dinner, a live band flown in, orchids imported from South America, a photographer who normally shot for magazines. It comes to just under $90,000, she said brightly. But of course we only do this once. Daniel sat beside her, not saying a word, a new watch glinting on his wrist. I wondered how far into debt he already was. That's a great deal of money, I said. Vanessa laughed her practice laugh. It's really quite reasonable these days. And traditionally, well, you know how these things work. My parents aren't in a position to help. But Walter left you comfortable, didn't he? There it was again. The reaching. The way she said comfortable, like it was a question she already knew the answer to. I'll contribute $15,000, I said. I chose the number on purpose. It was generous. It was also a tiny fraction of what I could write a check for without blinking, and I wanted to see how they'd react to being told no to the rest. Vanessa's smile slipped. That's kind, but we were rather hoping you'd cover the whole thing. It is your only son's wedding. Daniel finally looked up. Mom, Dad left you well off. I know he'd want us to have something nice. Hearing Walter used as leverage by my own son nearly undid me, but I held steady. Your father believed in living within your means, I said gently. $15,000 is my gift. You two will have to make the rest work, or make the wedding smaller. They left with Vanessa barely hiding her irritation. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Vanessa's really upset. She says most mothers, especially widows who got left well off, would do more. Can we talk about you giving more? That text told me everything. She believed I was rich, she was pushing my son to pry it loose, and she'd already made him her mouthpiece. 2 weeks later, Daniel called to say they'd adjusted a few things and taken out a loan for the rest. He sounded exhausted. I sent the $15,000 and felt sick about the debt they were burying themselves in. The day before the final venue walkthrough, I arrived early at Rosewood Manor. Vanessa was already there, standing near the fountain in the lobby, talking on her phone in a low, excited voice. She didn't see me. I stopped where I was. Everything's on track, she was saying. 1 more day and it's done. After that, it's just a matter of working on the money. A pause. No. He has no clue how much there really is. His mom plays broke, but that linen business sold for a fortune. She's sitting on it. Once I'm his wife, I'll start pushing. Why wait around for an inheritance when we can get it flowing now? She can't take it with her. I backed away before she turned. I don't remember the drive home. I only remember calling Raymond the next morning and saying the words out loud for the first time. My son is marrying a woman who's after our money. I need to protect everything. Raymond didn't sound surprised, which somehow made it worse. It happens more than you'd think, Margaret, he said. Does Daniel know the real number? No. He thinks we're comfortable, that's all. Good. Keep it that way for now, and let's get everything airtight. He sent me to Claire Donovan, my attorney, and I spent 3 hours in her office that I'll never forget. We reviewed the will, the trusts, every account. Claire explained calmly exactly where I stood. In this state, a new spouse has no claim to your assets, she said. The danger isn't Vanessa taking your money directly. She can't. The danger is Daniel receiving something and then mixing it into shared property, where it could be pulled apart in a divorce, so we protect it before it ever reaches him. We restructured everything. We built the trusts so that whatever Daniel eventually received would stay legally his and only his, walled off from any spouse, present or future. Claire helped me draft a letter to Daniel explaining every choice to be given to him if anything ever happened to me. I left her office with relief and grief tangled together in my chest. I was protecting Walter's life's work, but I was also keeping the biggest secret of my life from my only child, at the exact moment I should have been celebrating with him. That evening, Daniel called again, asking me to cover just a little more for the flowers and the photographer. "I've given what I'm giving," I said. "That's the gift, sweetheart." "But Mom, it's not like you can't. It's not about what I can afford. It's about boundaries, about the values your father and I raised you with." There was a long silence, and then, for just a moment, my real son came back. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. We'll figure it out." I sat in Walter's chair after we hung up. When in doubt, wait it out, Walter used to say. Time tells the truth better than any detective. So I decided to wait. I'd go to the wedding, I'd hold my tongue, and I'd watch. The morning of the wedding was bright and cloudless, a perfect spring day that felt like it was mocking the storm inside me. I put on the navy dress I'd bought myself, after quietly returning the frumpy, oversized one Vanessa had picked out for me without asking. And I drove to Rosewood Manor telling myself, over and over, "This is your son's wedding day. Be present. Be his mother." The place looked like a magazine spread, chandeliers strung over the garden, white orchids on every surface. A string quartet playing as guests filed in, a lot of them looking around the opulence with the same bewildered expression I was fighting to hide. Jean, Walter's oldest friend and Daniel's godfather, found me near the entrance. "Quite a show," he murmured. "Walter would have fainted at the flower bill alone." "He'd have told them to buy a house instead," I said, and we both smiled sadly. Jean looked at the champagne circulating on silver trays. "How on earth are they paying for this? Teachers don't make this kind of money." "They took loans," I said. "She has expensive tastes." The ceremony was beautiful and hollow. Daniel looked handsome in his tuxedo, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. When he said his vows, his voice was steady but flat. None of the joy I'd have expected from my son on the happiest day of his life. Vanessa, radiant in a gown that must have cost a small fortune, seemed more focused on the photographer catching her best angle than on the man she was promising to love. When they were pronounced husband and wife, her smile of triumph sent a chill straight through me. At the reception, I was seated with Vanessa's parents, Frank and Judy, a soft-spoken couple in department store clothes who looked as out of place in all that grandeur as I felt. "It's so fancy," Judy whispered to me. "We told Vanessa we couldn't help much. She said everything had to be perfect." "Were you surprised how fast it all happened?" I asked gently. Frank shifted in his seat. "Between us? Yes. Vanessa has always been ambitious. When she told us about Daniel and his family, she seemed awfully focused on the family part. Before I could ask what he meant, the DJ announced the toasts. Vanessa stood, tapped her glass, and beamed under the lights. "I want to thank everyone for celebrating with us," she said, "especially my new mother-in-law, Margaret, who raised such a wonderful man and welcomed me into a family with such security and stability." The emphasis was small. It was also unmistakable. I saw Daniel flinch. Later, slipping toward the restroom, I overheard Vanessa in a side hallway talking to her maid of honor. "Stop stressing about the credit cards," she was saying. "This is an investment. His mom is loaded. She just hides it. That linen company sold for millions before the old man died. This is only the beginning." I gripped a marble ledge until my knuckles went white. There was no satisfaction in being right, only a deep, aching sadness for my son. Near the end of the night, I caught Daniel alone at the bar. He'd had a few drinks, and for a moment, the fog lifted and my real son looked out at me. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I need to tell you something. About Vanessa. About all of this. I don't think—" "There you are, darling." Vanessa appeared at his elbow, sliding her arm through his. The photographer wants sunset shots. Come. And she led him away. Whatever he'd been about to say hung in the air between us, unfinished. The next morning, before they flew off to the Amalfi Coast for a honeymoon I knew they couldn't afford, Daniel called. "Just checking in before we go," he said, but his voice was thin. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" A pause. "Yeah. Vanessa and I were talking about looking at houses when we get back. Nothing crazy, just more space." Another pause. "I was wondering if maybe you'd help with a down payment, as a wedding gift. Vanessa said a lot of parents do that." There it was. Not even honeymoon yet, and the asks had already begun. "Buying a house is a big decision," I said. "Let's talk about it when you're home. Go. Enjoy Italy. Don't think about it." "Sure," he said, sounding both relieved and disappointed. "That makes sense." I hung up and stood in my kitchen a long time. "Oh, Walter," I said to the empty room, "our boy's in trouble, and I don't think he even sees it." Which brings me back to the black car in my driveway, 8 days after the wedding, when I was supposed to be in Italy in Daniel's mind, and instead stood in my garden with dirt on my hands. I brought them inside, I made coffee that no one touched, and the man in the gray suit opened his briefcase. "Mrs. Ellison," he began, in a voice that managed to be both polite and condescending. "My name is Grant Holloway. I'm an estate attorney. Vanessa has retained me regarding a family financial matter that needs prompt attention." Retained. They'd been married 8 days, and she had already hired a lawyer. "Where is Daniel?" I asked, looking straight at her. "With a realtor," Vanessa said smoothly, "looking at a property. He thought this conversation would go easier without him." The soft daughter-in-law act was gone. What sat across from me now was hard and cold and certain. Holloway cleared his throat. "It's come to our attention that following your husband's passing, you inherited approximately $53 million. The exact number. I had never spoken it aloud to a single soul outside Raymond, Claire, and Rosa. "And how exactly did that come to your attention?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Daniel found some of his father's old papers," Vanessa said. "Sale documents. We were quite surprised. Such wealth, and you living so modestly. It was a lie, and a clumsy one. Daniel had never found anything. This came from her poking through my house, and probably through his scanned files, months ago." "And why are you here?" I asked. Holloway smiled without warmth. "Vanessa and Daniel feel that, as your only son and heir, Daniel should have access to a portion of these funds now, rather than waiting for an inheritance decades away." "We're not getting any younger," Vanessa added, and I nearly laughed at the gall of it. "It's honestly a little selfish, hoarding all that when your son could be living." Holloway slid a document across my table. "We've prepared a modest proposal, an initial distribution of $12 million to purchase a suitable home, establish accounts, and clear the wedding debts, along with a monthly support arrangement of $40,000 so Daniel can focus on his career and Vanessa can transition to family life." Family life. The way she said it, dangling grandchildren I didn't have as a bargaining chip, turned my stomach to ice. "And if I say no?" I asked. Vanessa's mask cracked. "Then we'd have to consider other options. Mr. Holloway thinks Walter's will might be contestable, if we could show you influenced him while he was sick and dying. Or," Holloway added silkily, "questions could be raised about whether a woman of your age is truly fit to manage assets of this size. Courts are often sympathetic to family members protecting an estate from mismanagement." There it was. They were threatening to paint me as either a manipulator of my dying husband or a senile old woman, anything to pry Walter's life's work out of my hands. I stood up. "I think you should both leave now." "You're making a mistake," Vanessa snapped, the last of the sweetness gone. "Daniel will be devastated to learn how little his own mother cares about his future." "I doubt that," I said. "In fact, I wonder if Daniel even knows you're here." Her eyes narrowed. "Of course he does. This was his idea." The lie was so transparent it almost made me pity her. "Then I'll ask him myself when he's home. Until then, we're done." Holloway packed his briefcase, and for the first time he looked uncertain, like a man realizing he'd bet on the wrong horse. At the door, Vanessa turned back, her face openly hostile now. "This isn't over, Margaret. You share what belongs to this family, or you lose your son. Your choice." They drove off. I sat in Walter's chair, shaking, not with fear for the money, but with fear for my boy. If she'd go this far after 8 days, what wouldn't she do? I called Claire, then I called Raymond and froze every account she could possibly reach. And I sat down and typed out every single word of that conversation while it was fresh, my hands still trembling. The next morning, the doorbell rang, and my heart leapt into my throat. Vanessa, back with more. But it was Daniel, alone, and he looked wrecked. Bloodshot eyes, dark circles, clothes rumpled like he'd slept in them. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. "Can I come in?" I pulled him into my arms before he could say another word. I put the kettle on, the way I had 1,000 times when he was a boy with a scraped knee, and I set a mug of tea in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it. "We came back early," he said. "She told me she had a work emergency, but that wasn't it, was it?" "No," I said softly, "it wasn't." And I told him, all of it, the black car, the lawyer, the 12 million, the 40,000 a month, the threats to have me declared unfit or accuse me of manipulating his dying father. I watched my son's face move from confusion to horror to a terrible, quiet understanding. 12 million, he whispered. "She asked you for $12 million. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I had no idea, Mom. I swear on Dad's grave, I didn't know she was coming here. But, God, I should have. I should have seen it." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He took a shaky breath. "Things have been wrong since the wedding. Our first night in Italy, she was talking about $3 million houses. I told her we couldn't afford any of it, and she just laughed and said not to worry, that family money would take care of it." He shook his head. "Then I caught her going through the files on my laptop, Dad's old business documents I scanned years ago. When I asked what she was doing, she got angry, told me I was being paranoid, that I was ruining the honeymoon." He reached into his pocket and his hands were unsteady as he pulled out his phone. "And then I found these." He showed me the texts. Messages between Vanessa and her maid of honor, going back months. Got him to propose. Wedding next month. MIL still playing poor, but the money's real. Linen dollars equals jackpot. Push for house money right after the wedding, while he's still love-struck. And the one that stopped my heart. Daniel has no idea about the family wealth. Once we're married, lawyer says the estate can be challenged. Almost there. I looked at my son, and I made a decision I'd been putting off for months. No more secrets. "Daniel," that number Holloway said, 53 million. "It's true. That's what your father left me." His eyes went wide. "I knew Dad did well, but 53 million? "We never told you," I said, "because your father didn't want the money to decide your life. He wanted you to build your own, and you did. He was so proud of you, Daniel, prouder of you than of anything he ever built." For a long moment my son just sat there, and then his shoulders shook, and he wept, for his father, for the marriage that had lasted 8 days, for the future he'd imagined and lost. "I really thought she loved me," he said. "I know." He wiped his face and looked up, and something in him had hardened into resolve. "I want to see everything. Dad's estate, the accounts, all of it. No more secrets between us. And then I want to end this." We called Claire, and she came over that same afternoon with the documentation of the ambush. The 3 of us sat at my kitchen table and built a plan. "The marriage is only days old," Claire said, "with clear evidence of fraud, that she married him to access assets. We have strong grounds for an annulment. And every dollar of your estate, Margaret, is protected. She can't touch it. She never could." "There's no prenup," Daniel admitted, ashamed. "I didn't even think to—" "It complicates things," Claire said, "but it doesn't sink us. Those texts are damning, and inheritances are separate property in this state. She has no leg to stand on." That evening, Daniel called Vanessa and, in a steady voice, asked her to come to my house to discuss the family finances. I heard the eagerness in her reply even from across the room. When she arrived, her face lit up at the sight of him, then curdled into concern when she saw his expression. "Darling, what's wrong? Is your mother giving you a hard time about our—" "Sit down, Vanessa," Daniel said. With Claire beside us, we laid it all out. The texts, the account of the ambush, the searched files. Vanessa tried tears first. "These are ridiculous. I love you, Daniel. Yes, I was curious about the family. What wife wouldn't be?" "A wife who loved her husband," I said quietly, "wouldn't bring a lawyer to demand $12 million from his mother 8 days after the wedding." She switched to driving a wedge. "Your mother has always hated me. She's controlling you with money. Can't you see that?" Daniel pulled his hand away from her reach. "Stop lying. I read the texts, Vanessa. I know what this was from the very first night at that fundraiser." Her mask fell off completely then, and what was underneath was pure fury. "Fine," she spat. "What was I supposed to do? Marry some cello-playing schoolteacher with no future? Your family's sitting on $53 million and living like nobodies. It's pathetic." "What's pathetic?" Daniel said, with a calm that made me prouder than any wedding day could have, "is believing money is the same as a life. My father built everything he had on hard work and his word. You wouldn't understand a single day of it." Claire laid out the path forward: immediate separation, annulment on grounds of fraud, and a cease and desist on any claim against my estate. Vanessa stood, snatched up her designer bag, and hurled one last threat. "You'll regret this, both of you. I have rights as a spouse, and I'll make this cost you." "The only thing this cost me," Daniel said, "was a lesson, and it was worth every cent." She stormed out, and my son sank onto the couch, hollowed out, and said, "I can't believe I was so blind." I sat down beside him. "Love makes us blind, sweetheart. There's no shame in having an open heart. The shame is all hers." The annulment went through 6 weeks later. Vanessa threatened a long legal fight, but folded the moment Claire laid the evidence in front of her lawyer, a different lawyer, it turned out. Holloway had quietly stepped away. The marriage was declared void, as though it had never happened. Legally, it never had. Daniel insisted on paying off every dollar of the wedding debt himself, though I offered 100 times. "I made the mess," he said. "I'll clean it up." Dad would have expected nothing less. Those months were hard. I watched my son grieve not just a woman, but a whole future he'd let himself imagine. And yet, inside that grief, I watched him find his way back to the man Walter and I had raised, steady, honest, whole. 3 months after the annulment, we started a new tradition. Sunday evenings on my porch, going over the accounts together, openly, nothing hidden. I set up a trust for him, structured to protect what he'd one day receive from any future claim. "It'll be yours at 35, just as your father planned," I told him. "The protections aren't because I don't trust you. They're because everyone deserves a second lock on the door." He nodded. "I've been thinking about what to do with it eventually, maybe a scholarship, for kids who can't afford instruments, in Dad's name." I had to look away so he wouldn't see me cry. That was Walter's son, right there. His life bloomed in the strangest way after the worst of it passed. He threw himself into his students. His community orchestra gave him a solo. He started volunteering with a program that teaches financial literacy to young adults, turning the worst mistake of his life into something that might save someone else from theirs. And a little over a year after the wedding that wasn't, Daniel started seeing someone new. Hannah, a speech therapist who works with kids, who drives a 15-year-old hatchback and packs her lunch in an old lunchbox with a dent in the lid. Their relationship moved slowly, built on the same quiet things Walter and I built ours on. When Daniel brought her to dinner, she spent the whole night asking about Walter's stories, not his money. "She doesn't know about the inheritance," Daniel told me afterward, "and I'm not telling her, not until I'm absolutely sure she loves me." He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in a long time. "Dad was right about everything, wasn't he?" "He usually was," I said. I never expected, at my age, to learn anything new about the world, but I did. I learned that protecting a fortune isn't really about lawyers and trusts and frozen accounts. though it needs those too. It's about protecting the values that built it in the first place. The hard work, the humility, the understanding that money is a tool and never an identity. I learned that a secret isn't always a wall between you and the people you love. Sometimes it's a fence, the kind that keeps the right people close and the wrong people out. And I learned that Walter's caution, all those years of keep it quiet, keep it working, that wasn't him being cheap or paranoid. That was love. A kind of love that reached out from beyond the grave and protected our son when I couldn't quite do it alone. The 53 million is still there, still growing, still quiet. But the truest part of it isn't in any account. It's in the scholarship we started for kids who can't afford to play. It's in the small business loans we now make to people chasing the same kind of dream Walter chased with 3 trucks and a leaky warehouse. It's in the peace of knowing my son is safe and himself again, and loved by someone who never once asked what his father left behind. By staying silent about that inheritance when my son got married, I didn't just protect the money. I protected everything the money was ever supposed to stand for. So that's my story. That's how one instinct, one small voice telling me to keep quiet, saved my son from losing far more than money. Let me ask you something, and please, tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to keep a secret to protect someone you love? I truly want to hear it. I read every comment, and I think there's wisdom in this community that we could all learn from. If this story moved you, do me a kindness. Give it a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone navigating a complicated family situation with money, share this with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, and may you always have the wisdom to protect what matters most.